Hello and welcome to the Quest for the Good Life with Dr. Mike Strauss. Today, we have a very, very special guest. We are elated because we've got no other than the great Nate Beers. Nate, of course, needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. He's a behavioral scientist. He's the founder and host of the exceptional and paradigm shifting podcast IDD Leader. And he has vast knowledge that he's accumulated while hosting the podcast and throughout his career, really. And we cannot wait to ask him a lot of questions. Nate, first, I want to talk to you a little bit about a word, because I love words. I feel like every word has its own life. Some words even have a lifespan and they die out and disappear. But I have a kind of one of my favorite words, and it comes from a fairy tale, believe it or not. Some words are Latin, some are French origin. This one comes from a Persian fairy tale, and it's about three princes. And the three princes travel on a quest. But along the way, they kind of find fortunate things that were not part of the quest. And those princes are known as the three princes of Serendip. There's a British author, his name is Horace Walpole, who long time ago, 300 years ago, read that tale, that Persian tale, and he came up with the word serendipity, of course. And I feel like both you and Dr. Strauss and myself have discovered a lot of things along the way that we did not expect to discover. And they have kind of changed our approach to the industry, our approach to our work and life. And we were on the road with Dr. Strauss just last week, a long road trip, 8 hours. We went to another state to help incubate one of our models. And we talked a lot for these 8 hours. And we went down memory lane and remembered a lot of the things that we've done in the past 30, in the case of Dr. Strauss, more than 40 years. And we also talked about podcasts. And your podcast was discovered by both of us serendipitously. It was a case of serendipity, and it really was unexpected. As we started our podcast, we searched for something to guide us, and we've discovered yours. And it has literally enriched us and has given us ideas and has helped us a lot. In your podcast with Dr. Strauss, who was a guest, it was a two-part podcast. You talked a lot about scheduling, innovative scheduling, and a lot about his approach to technology and technology leveraged services. And you said at the end of the podcast that you've discovered things that you did not expect within this episode, these two episodes. The same goes for both of us, for Mike and me. We've listened and listened and listened, and it's addictive. Your podcast is truly addictive, and we've discovered so many things. So I wanted just to tell you that the word serendipity applies perfectly to what you've given us. We didn't expect it. We were on our own quest, and then boom, we found you, and it's really been illuminating. So thank you very much for this. And I have a feeling Dr. Strauss is going to ask you a very typical question for our
Evo, I'm not going to add anything, too high in my idea. I am going to ask, though, what I always ask is, we always think we all have superpowers. Everybody has a superpower. So, I always everybody knows why I wear a fedora on this podcast now because of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I've always believed that Indiana Jones is a scientist and he goes after audacious goals and somehow gets them in unexpected ways. And I love that. I kind of like, I'm not against finding the Holy Grail for staff stability out there. It'd be great if there was one. I generally found there's nuggets everywhere. And then the art is how do you put that in something, that's a scalable model that you can help people with. And that's what I do. And I always wear this hat to kind of remind me of that we can achieve some things that other people think is just like crazy, And so with that being said, who are you? Like, who would you be?
Yes, I thankfully I've listened to your podcast before this, so I knew what to expect on that question. I'll answer it in just a moment, but first, Evo, that introduction, maybe I could take you everywhere because that was just very, 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 very warm.
It's
Perhaps
honest.
Okay, I'm glad it's straight from the heart,
good.
but I'm glad that I'm glad to hear that, and discovering you guys has also been just a huge blessing in my life. So, as far as a character, I really thought about this, and here's where I've landed. I'm kind of a decent sized Marvel fan, and so I'm gonna say Spider-Man. But let me explain why. Um, Spider-Man kind of lives in this tension between being just your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, excuse me, just your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and then the advice that his Uncle Ben gave him, which is with great power comes great responsibility. And that kind of reminds me actually of a quote that Jesus says in Luke 12, where he says, "To whom much is given, much is required." And the honest truth is, I feel like I've just had so many blessings in my life, from early on to now. I mean, I was raised in a stable, loving home, and that's just unfortunately more rare than it should be.
You're
And just
right.
a lot of things. I had some great mentors early on, so I feel like I've just been given this abundance of blessings, and I feel kind of that tension between, can I just like go? Well, I don't have the money to go hang out on a beach somewhere, but can I just kind of live my life on my own? But then also this responsibility of like, no, I've been given so much that I feel compelled that I want to pay it forward. I want to share that with other people,
Yeah.
and not be the Dead Sea where all the water flows in, but I want to be a river where it's flowing through and flowing out as well. So there we
Well,
go. So Spider-Man.
that's good, and I really appreciate that. You know what I think we kind of found each other, and I very much love your podcast, but I like what you've done in general, and the fact that you're helping people. I think you know we're a lot the same, and we a little bit complementary. I would say that my podcast is kind of trying to look at a variety of tools and toolboxes, and I'm perseverating on implementation. To be honest with you, I've in my 40 years, and this is some of the things I want to talk to you about. You run across great ideas sometimes, and then you run across ideas that sound great, but we don't really know if they're great because they're not measured, and sort of put to the test of evaluation in any way, but they have promise. You just know they do, or you feel like they do. And then even when you find them and you can help people, implementing ideas in practice is a whole different thing. I mean, one of my favorite people in the world, a scientist, Dean Fixon, Karen Blase, are two scientists, behavioral scientists that came from University of Kansas. They went to Boys Town. Boys Town was interesting because Boys Town, when they went to Boys Town, they went in the I think in the late 70s, mid to late 70s. So it's a long time ago, and they're still very active. But they went up there when there was like oh my gosh, I thought it was like a $500 million endowment, more than that.
Wow.
Yeah, and Boys Town was interesting because Boys Town was kind of the recipient of all the donations after World War II, where in World War I, even where the people lost their fathers, and Boys Town was kind of a place where they sent money to help raise, young kids who didn't have fathers, or troubled youth sometimes. But he was up there when they had this huge endowment, and actually had challenges with spending it, to comply with some of their requirements as a not-for-profit. So he started this thing called Boys Town USA, which took a model that they had not yet really fully developed and disseminated across the country. They worked with a group from the University of Kansas, our larger group, to create models that could be replicated and disseminated. And he spent his entire, and still does, his entire career on what are the necessary requirements to get things widely implemented, used. So what I see lots of times is, and I think you run across this, really good ideas, maybe even more than ideas. Maybe they're really like things that work, but getting other people to use them with integrity, and being methodical about that and really helping people. It's called implementation science, but that's a science in and of itself. And honestly, I think and for us, it's going to be worth the podcast. I'm going to see if I can talk Dean into doing that with us. But I run across this all the time, all across the country, where we're working with our scheduling thing. It's worked in 20 states now, but each group kind of thinks that they're so unique that it won't work there, or that there's concerns about it or fear about it, and or they there's certain requirements to implement it, and sometimes you try to cut corners, not cost corners, just cut implementation corners with it, and it doesn't go so well. Like all you need is training, or just little things like that. So you got to have, what I loved about your podcast is you really have a theme, for sure, but your ideas are highly diverse, and I love it because I love to get ideas, all the different
Yeah.
ideas that do it. But do you run across the issue of like why things aren't implemented, or is your thoughts about this? I'm interested.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Well, I'll take you back to when I first became a behavior analyst, and as you're studying for that humongous exam with all the stress that goes with that, you're kind of thinking like, I hope I understand the science enough to be able to help somebody. And I mean,
Yeah.
part of it, of course, you've just been doing all these field hours, so you kind of know that it's working. But then this funny thing happens, and I mean, you see it when you're doing the field work, but especially once you switch roles and now you're the one that's creating all the plans and is kind of in charge a little bit. You realize the challenge isn't figuring out what the solution could be. The challenge is getting buy-in from all the parties that need to get buy-in.
Yeah.
In other words, it's not actually the contingencies for the individual, the identified client in air quotes, or whoever the person being served is. It's actually getting it to work for all the other parties involved. And I think that's exactly kind of with what you're saying with implementation. That's really where the rubber meets the road. And that is it's a huge challenge, because the competing demands for time and attention are very significant. And so, that old adage, until the pain of how it is worse than, oh wait, I'm butchering.
Yeah, no, you're getting close, right?
We don't change until the pain of staying the same is worse than the pain of change. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And
And in that vein, there is a lot of pain in staffing instability. I mean, there is. So that's kind of what is interesting to me. I was in Alaska. We just did a very successful implementation up there. And then there's another place in Alaska that we just talked to, and they were feeling that they were incredibly different. And, you can be still different and do something, but they've been doing kind of the same thing for a couple of decades. And it's like, and you're not getting the results you want. And they have incredible pain. But I think the only thing I'd add to that is that's a great test. The pain has to be greater than the status quo. But there's one other thing. It's like, there's this fear factor that it could get worse. and that is really sort of that will just sort of stymie a lot of people because they're so frightened. They know how bad it is, and they know they couldn't allow it to get worse. And I think that adds to that balance. Is the one plus side of that equation is plus fear, fear of change.
Absolutely.
And so people need a lot of help to get through that. But there are lots of ideas out there, and one of the things I'm definitely going to invite you to is this next year in 2026, fall of 2026, we're going to be doing a invitation only, which is an interesting approach, but we're doing that because it's the first year,
Mhm.
a conference. And the conference is going to be almost exclusively on labor, maybe a little bit on technology as it applies to labor. So really just really on those like remote support combined with in-home supports and anything that's designed to improve the stability of the care industry, really focusing a lot on how do we improve the lives of people who are doing all the front end work to help provide support to DSPs. We're going to look at all kinds of like non-traditional benefits and strategies like that. I want to have a workshop, sort of a conference where we bring in people who are highly motivated, people, in my mind, people who have been successful in implementing and developing things, and who understand that staff stability isn't a one and done thing. It is a lifelong quest. Like I'm waiting to find the goal, the Holy Grail. But it's more like I get these little thimbles of, you know, of liquid that
Yeah.
tide me over for a week. It doesn't solve the problem, but it improves it a lot. But I feel like if we could get together the right group of people for a few years and then have kind of the internal presentations on what we have been doing, followed by some kind of strategic process for, okay, what are we going to advance this year? How are we going to work together on a sort of a combined R&D perspective to add to the body of research, add to the toolbox, and then have a focus on implementation as a group, because we're all capable people. If we can work on that, we might be able to, make a bigger difference on how we help people. And what was intriguing with your podcast always is there are lots of different diverse ideas and some
Yes.
practices and some real evidence that can make a difference. And those are the people that have taken the time to think about something and do something and even measure it. And I think that's pretty cool. So, you probably are sitting on a bunch of nuggets that would be very good to get organized in a way. People do their own thing, but it's kind of nice to, join minds every now and then and develop, more of a unified approach for that. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I honestly feel like I'm on the front row seat with different leaders that are stepping outside of the norm, that are innovating.
yeah.
Obviously, you guys have a tremendous amount of momentum there at Good Life Innovations and with Good Life U, particularly when it comes to staffing models. Not to box you into that, but I
Mm,
certainly see that as a
no.
huge part of the
Yeah.
specialty that you bring. Um, but as the conversations I've had with people I've met, one of the things that's so fascinating to me is that there are other organizations that have found, like you said, nuggets that have been absolutely transformational for them. I'll share one with you.
Yeah, because that's kind of what this podcast is a little bit about. Is like I'm kind of interested in some of your favorites that you've come across over the years that you felt like made a difference, and that's pretty cool to remember a little bit. So what do you got?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you this one story in just a second, but I just want to contextualize it by saying that what you're talking about with this implementation piece, for it to be replicable, there does need to be obviously measurement, but there also has to be um, clarity on what caused the change. So if an organization, all of a sudden they become a positive outlier, instead of having staff turnover at 40, 50 above percent, they're suddenly down in 20%, or their vacancies went from, always floating 10 to 20 positions to now they pretty much can fill a position when it opens up within a week or two. And these kinds of things. And so some of the people I talk to have, I think, accidentally discovered some real nuggets and don't even realize quite how precious what they're sitting on is. Whereas others, such as with what you guys are doing, and then another guest that the episode hasn't released yet, but have really systematized it. And so, but anyhow, one of those nuggets that that comes to mind is an organization in North Dakota. Friendship is the name of the organization. They were identifying a common struggle, which is that turnover in the first 90 days, first 6 months, first year. This is really where turnover hurts the most.
Highest amount.
Yeah. And so, like many organizations, they're experiencing that. And they decided to start asking a question at their meetings. And when I say at their meetings, I actually mean it at pretty much every, as far as I could understand from how they shared it, every single meeting. So this would be their senior leadership team meetings, this down to your house managers having a meeting with their staff, and everything in between. The question was this: what have you done lately to welcome somebody new? And they didn't just ask it as a rhetorical thing. They would literally take a few minutes at the beginning of every meeting and listen to people share the answer to that. And it seems so simple, and it is simple. It's certainly not complex. That's a $0 strategy right there, by the way. That cost nothing. But what they saw happened, it's not what happens in the first month or the first 2 months, right? That's where a lot of initiatives fail, is actually because they're tried for such a short time. We don't have time to see if they're starting to take root or not. But in any case, they stuck with that for about 2 years. I think it was about 2 years at the time of the recording. And what started to happen was people started coming with stories, and then they started thinking and doing things outside of the meeting, knowing, oh, the next time I show up with my boss, they're going to ask me, what have I done to welcome somebody new? In other words, in a behavioral term, there's going to be some measurement. Now, it's informal measurement, but it was measurement as opposed to just, oh, you should go do that, And they said that their HR director was on that podcast episode, and he shared that their first 90-day and their 1 year turnover, both of those, the turnover dropped by 50% in a matter of about a year. And he said, we've tried a lot of things. So they think that the biggest thing that they did was actually, you could call it a cultural shift. They shifted the culture to be very much more welcoming, but it started with one simple practice. And so to me, that's like one of those nuggets. Now, is that going to solve all the issues? Of course it's not. And was that the only thing they're doing? No, they were already doing different kinds of staff recognition, and it's part of it's a piece of a bigger pie. But you never know what that tipping point will be, right? You just never know when you're going to hit that tipping point and have things start the momentum go in the right direction. So that's just one example of a practice that I had learned about.
But that the first 90 days is, if you look at all the research, that first 90 days, obviously it's the most turbulent turnover, and we've looked at that a lot. Like, of course, nationally, I think they published that 40% of the staff are over or of a provider is there between 1 and 5 years, so they have some stability for 40%. But then you go and say 36% or less than 6 months, and 90 days accounts for most of that. So you just got this. If you took all your turnover as a bar of years, you would see a little movement over here and this huge movement, here.
Yes.
And it's so disruptive. From my time with you that I'm over turnover is an important measure. I would not doubt that, but sometimes it misses the mark on that, and we always focus on the number of our primary measures, the number of people involved in care, and we believe as that number goes down, care quality goes up. But the thing that contributes the most is that that first 90 days, and you've got to do something about that. And there's not one thing, you're right, but that's a really good idea, but part of it about that, I want to say, is somebody had, in order for that to be a good idea that works instead of just a good idea, somebody had to reliably put in a system where they regularly asked the same people that question and had some level of accountability for the implementers of it,
Yes.
so that they knew. And that's what we found out, Nate, is I know you're behavioral analyst. That's one of the things I admire a lot, and it's one of the things I feel of. I predate BCBA,
Mm-hmm.
so, and I was always organizational, so I did not become a BCBA credential behavioralist because I was really working in organizational stuff. So it really wasn't. It wasn't as important for me at the time as others, but the point of it is that uh, you know, on this, I approach in Good Life, we have a 2-week review. I'm literally a clinician for instability.
Hmm.
And I can tell you, like we have metrics in place, like workforce metrics that are constantly updated. And it's like a scale. And then every couple of weeks we look at that and we dive down into homes and we look at some stuff. And I think as important as a good idea is like this accountability where you're actually reviewing something so consistently and so regularly that it's almost making a culture in place of accountability, whatever the idea is. Because I've used that process and found out that good ideas aren't working even. And I move on, but every now and then you stumble on something. We have a kind of a internal thing called the Holy Home Review, and the Holy Home Review is just that. It sounds just like everything that has that quest for the good life thing, but instead of the Holy Grail, this is just literally a home that leaks. And
Different kind of holes,
staff,
yes.
different kind of holes, and yeah. So we would review, and I give you a perfect example. We have live-in staff because live-in staff in a lot of our homes, because the kind of model that we would use on a lot of homes is that's very stable. But we were having a lot of turnover in it, and uh, and so they were like looking at that as a whole of like, well, what can we do to improve the live-in problem? But when you got down into the sort of the bowels of it, it was like, wow, we have 22 homes that have live-in staff, but only 3 are producing all that turbulence. Only 3.
Hmm.
So it wasn't really like a generic thing, but the idea of having measures, which are important, good measures are important, and then regularly reviewing it and doing that. But you were talking about that. I love the idea on that. We had done something different, and again, it was only a little fraction thing, but it was important. We hired people and did 2 things. They aren't assigned to a home permanently. And so we often, because we're full, we have a superimposed staff that tries out homes, to replace vacancies, and they get to pick the home that we want. And we stumble on this, but in this that whole idea of serendipity or just stumbling on something, we were putting them in these homes, letting them try out stuff only because we were full, and that was the reason we could do it. And then all of a sudden, this weird contingency is in order for then they found the home they liked, and that's what they said. I'll just be relief, until I get into that home. And so we put the choice back on the staff as opposed to, just assigning them. And what turned out to be kind of a nugget there was that the managers and people realized that they had to sort of coddle and be nice to the people that get picked. So
Yes.
and so it's just
Yeah.
but you don't know that stuff on the front end, and so but the 90-day is something we need to work on so much more industry wide.
Yeah.
You know,
crazy
Nate,
on that.
I was listening to the podcast. Of course, I'm listening religiously to the IDD Leader, but it is kind of unfair to ask you, but I will anyway. It's like asking you which of your kids you love the most, but you've got 59 other children. Those are the episodes of your
Yeah.
podcast. Each one is
Well, don't
fantastic
say
in
the favorite. What ones were the most memorable? Put it that way,
okay, yeah,
Evo,
that
because
maybe that's the
because
way I should
I don't
answer.
want him to say not me, and so we can't do that. Just tell me other ones that are
Other
memorable,
than
right?
the one with Dr. Strauss. Yeah.
Oh, because
He
of
was making
course,
some memories.
far and away, that one, of course, absolutely. Now that I'm sitting right here in front of the two
won't
of
even
you,
go there, right?
I
oh,
Well,
personally,
what?
I love the friendship podcast.
mm,
These guys were spectacular. Mike, they had a DSP that worked there for 40 years,
Mm.
and they had many DSPs that just love their job, but they have a very interesting approach, very personal approach to recruitment and retention. And to use one of Nate's favorite analogies, I feel like every day at Friendship is like an episode of Undercover Boss.
yeah.
You know, they really try to kind of flip the org chart in a way, and it is really impressive what they're doing there. It's really amazing. I love that.
So what are really good, memorable ones over all your time that you
Yeah.
really?
Let me share a story from an episode with Core Services. They've been recognized with the what's that called? The Movie Mountains Award, which I think you guys
Movie
also
Mountains, yeah.
were on a different
Yeah.
year recognized with.
Yeah.
For I think it was for they've done a lot with technology, and not so dissimilar from Good Life. They've also done a lot with staffing, like a whole lot.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess it was so I was interviewing. He's the new executive director. He just recently stepped into the role. The last one, she retired but didn't retire. I think she works for the NADSP now. So she retired, but then immediately was recruited to come on with the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals. But anyhow, when she took over, and that was his mentor, and he's saying this like this is just casual, but it has left a mark with me in my mind. He said when she came on, so this is maybe a decade ago or something, in their office space, there was a physical, literal line that separated the higher management, like the higher ups, from the rest, and that DSPs were told, don't cross the line unless you're invited.
Mm.
Now, when she came on, she got rid of that. She got rid of the physical line right away. But it took years to get rid of the metaphorical line. And I think that accidentally, a lot of organizations have that. It's not through ill intent, and they probably don't have it actually. Like, I don't know if it was painted or if it was just change a carpet, or I don't actually know how it worked. But that line is such a vivid story to me. And then, as he described, one of the ways they got rid of that line, they had to do a lot. It's not like one little initiative. It took a lot.
Yeah.
Of course, they have an open door policy, all this kind of stuff. And one thing they did is they have an anonymous, stupid rule online form that you can fill out at any time anonymously as a staff person when you think that there's a stupid rule. And I have never heard of that before. I love it. And people actually use it. And it leads to important internal discussions, but then important internal changes.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes, this is true with families, this is true with organizations. When we start something, there was a need as to why we started it. But oftentimes that practice far exceeds the length of time that need was there. It's like the story, you maybe have heard this one, but the granddaughter, she's a young adult now, it's finally her turn to cook the Christmas ham. And so she does what she's always seen done. The first thing you do when you get that big, huge ham, you just cut off the end, and then you stick it in the oven, you bake it. And so her little daughter asks her, "Mommy, why you cut off the end of the ham?" "Oh, well, that's because that's how my mom always did it." And then she kind of got to thinking about it. So when the family shows up, she asks her mom, who's at this point, in her 50s, and she says, "Mom, why did you always cut off the end of the ham?" And the mom says, "I don't know. I never thought about it. But my mom did." Now, their mom, she's by now this time in the nursing home, but she still has some of, she's still cognitively functioning. And so when they pick her up and bring her over for the holiday dinner, she asks her mom, at this point, the old lady, so this is the grandma asking the great grandma.
I got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
2 generations back.
Why'd you cut the end off the ham? And the grandma says, because the pan wasn't big enough.
I love that,
and that's
so
what happens in
true.
organizations. It happens in families, but it happens in organizations where we set
Yeah.
something in place because it was really useful when it was set in place, or there was a crisis and we just had to, act fast and make a change. But then that rule or that policy, whether it's an official policy or whether it's sort of an unwritten rule, it ends up perpetuating itself far beyond its usefulness. And so anyhow, that's just that episode stands out. There's a lot of great episodes. No discredit to all my other wonderful, wonderful guests.
No, but some of the things that like that, it brings back memories and, because of mistakes, by the way, because you said just one thing like that, one cultural thing can set you back. And even when you change it or didn't even mean it, it can take a while to fix. One thing that happened to me about 30 years ago, Nate, I may have said something like this in when we last talked, but oops, sorry, we have affection for the Wizard of Oz in Kansas. And I've always loved collecting that memorabilia. In fact, I used to have in my office, I don't anymore, and used to have all kinds of pictures up of the Wizard of Oz. It was fun. Um, but a board member once got me a little plaque that says, not nobody gets to see the wizard, and put it up at my entry of the door. This is 30 years ago. And within, I would say, 2 hours, somebody was like, said something about that. And I didn't even put it up, but I took that thing down, and I tell you, people remembered that thing for about a year.
And it was up for 2 hours.
It was up for 2 hours. And I didn't even do it, but I will tell you, you got to be real careful, because people sometimes hear, what they expect to hear in agencies and not what is said. And you got to be really hard. You got to work hard to change a culture. There's no doubt about it. But part of it is what you measure and what you focus on. And, the other thing we're really getting into now is, we really value and start to better understand the world of marketing. And by marketing, it really more of just communicating a theme to people until it's salient to them.
Yeah.
That's like having a month that emphasize. It sounds simple enough, but what each of the months, so what you try to emphasize, you bring out some T-shirts here or there, or some buttons, or whatever. It's kindness, or Evo's hat. Be a good human.
There it is.
Whatever it is, it's just something that brings the humanity out in us and stuff. I'll always remember, you get so busy and you don't ask people the right questions. You don't take time just to say a few things. Just yesterday, we were in the budget year is an awful year. It is for us in Kansas, and we're actually closing a program, which is hard to do. Anyway, one of the people, I was talking to parents about this, and we have alternatives to stuff, but one of the parents that came up to talk to me, actually thanked me for the program, because it's gone on a long time, gave a lot of notice. We have alternatives, but she, we spent time talking. Turns out that she is, you'll know this, the wife of Sedano. And if you don't remember, Sudano is about a 30-year employee of ours. And I didn't know it.
Mm,
But, it's like spending time to do that. It was just like cool that I would have totally glossed that over if you just don't spend enough time to hang with people a little bit. Sometimes
yeah.
it's simple things. So, well, that's cool. So friendship, that's a really cool thing. Is there anything have you seen more and more technology kind of driven ideas that are coming forward in podcasts? Is it morphing in any way to you, or do you see people focusing on like right now? For us, we were last since COVID, probably worked on what I call continuous care models, which are really people who need help 24/7. But right now, a lot of the support that we're really focusing on and models to address it is on what I call fractional care. Fractional care is like when somebody needs 3 hours here or 4 hours there, and traditionally that's all done by focusing on like that individual and trying to get somebody that would work there for 4 hours. And we've ever research you can read is you can't really hire somebody easily to work part-time as a professional and focus on 3 odd hours a day,
Yeah.
and that's not a good model. It really isn't. But that's what we're focusing on now. And of course, technology has really been pivotal in that. Have you seen a theme in your stuff of like changes since COVID or changes in what you're hearing on the podcast or what the focus of the podcast is?
No, that's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind is, and I think we'll end up seeing a lot more of this kind of thing. It's hard for me to predict exactly how it's going to play out, but it relates to AI. There's
Mm.
an organization in Arkansas Support Networks, Dr. Sayard Evans,
Yeah,
and they
I'm gonna
developed
say
a like a chat GPT, but that's where they train, you can train AI models in kind of your framework or your thing. But what they've been able to leverage that for is then they have trained their or at least a portion of their staff to do a certain kind of interviewing to really try to help create the most person-centered plans possible. A lot of
Mhm.
times those plans feel very dry, very kind of repetitive. It might be a little different from one
Yeah,
client or individual to the next, but it doesn't really capture as many of the strengths that they have and this kind of stuff. So they're trying to sort of tip that on its head, and it has a staffing application I'll share in a moment. But they've so they the humans are doing the interviewing. Okay, we haven't quite gotten as far as the Terminator
mhm.
hasn't shown up to do the interview yet, or Jarvis if you're into Marvel. But in any case, they interview, they input this, and then their AI model kind of spits back out a plan that is ironically extremely person centered. So the AI is spitting out this very person centered plan. But then what they've done that I think is pretty exceptional is then they've also then created shift guides for the staff that are working there. Like they're taking, and this is, I mean, the behavior analyst in me is very excited about this. They're taking these big goals, right? Like if the person values, if they're into art and that's a big part of their life, or they like singing or whatever it is, these
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
very kind of big goals, then they've broken that down into a shift guide so that when when the direct support professional shows up to work, it's broken down not just kind of what that big general goal is, but here's some actual action steps you could take on your shift today to work towards it.
no,
Does that
that's
make
great.
sense? And then
Yeah,
and so that I'm that was one thing that really comes to mind. And to be honest, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on your show, but when it comes to like technology and staffing models, I do think that what you guys are doing is on the forefront of that, and I think there'll be a lot more that I think you'll see a lot more people adopting that. But
yeah.
but yeah,
Well, but you use a word there, to AI, but they're kind of it's become one word though,
it has.
and I'll throw another thing is privacy, and all the issues around that. I'm doing my next. It's almost like a internal podcast that we're going to publish, but it's all. I did a presentation in South Dakota. It was called the Six States Conference, and it was kind of an invited one because they only had one speaker at a time, and everybody was there. It was kind of fun. In fact, I followed Joe, who is the CEO of National Association of Direct Support Professionals, and he's a amazing guy. I love hearing him, and all of what he talks about is so important, of how you can elevate the lives. We have that in common.
Yes.
And always pay, but there's so many other things you can do too that you shouldn't ignore because you'll never
Yes.
have enough money. But the big thing I did up there, which was really interesting, is I did a presentation on what I call the privacy paradox. And what's so interesting about it, I mean, it's just the most fascinating topic. We're going to release that in a couple of weeks, but the privacy paradox is our perseveration with privacy is actually working against advancing privacy.
Hmm.
And
Explain that. Yeah.
well, because we've broken this down. Sometimes people don't ask the right questions. I'll ask you one. Like everybody worries about remote supports and care as an example, but you and I right now are virtually connected to each other. And let me just ask you this: would you rather have a remote meeting with your boss, or would you rather have your boss come to your home to meet with you?
Let's
And,
stick with
and and everybody does the same thing that
let's
you're
stick
doing right
with
now.
the
They start laughing.
Let's stick with the computer.
Course,
Let's stick with the
I mean,
computer. Do I have to clean my toilet before they show up? You know what I mean?
exactly. But it's a nanosecond response. It's like, well, of course I'd rather have a remote meeting because I can control so many things with that I couldn't control if I had somebody, come in. And it's so laughable in a way. But then all of a sudden, well, but that's exactly what care is. You're choosing between your boss, let's call it a care, somebody intruding into your home, versus you remotely meeting with them. And it's not like an either or, but the idea that somebody shouldn't have the choice between that is really working against privacy. It's certainly working against choice, but I'm not going to do it now. I can go on for 2 hours on how privacy can be enhanced by technology. I mean, your iPhone, you look at it, there's a camera there that is used for privacy to open it up.
Mm-hmm.
It's there it is, and you put it to somebody else, they can't do it. So the privacy function is advanced by a camera, and what we've done in IDD is two things: is that we've defined hardware and say if it has hardware, it can't advance privacy. It's against privacy if it has certain hardware, which it does not translate to the real world with you and me. I mean, we use hardware. What really actually controls it is software and how it's used. And some cameras don't transmit an image; they're just optical sensors. Some, like your car, so many things. So they haven't got it right yet. And the other thing about it is, which is really super interesting to me, is the rules at the federal level say that you're supposed to use the least intrusive, and this is a behavioralist, the least intrusive approach that can achieve the goal. Well, turns out there's six major goals, federally required goals, from everything from cultivating independence to choices to inclusion to, there's several in addition to privacy, and there's not one that's more important. And even the rules and regulations around privacy existed before technology, and they applied to staff. What's so interesting is when it comes to technology, we're not doing that rule, that beacon rule of picking the least intrusive approach to care that can advance those goals. We're we're basically, because if we did, we would compare it to what we would use instead of that. But we don't ever compare, remote support to what you would use instead of remote support. We're just saying, well, if it has a camera, if all of a sudden somebody can self-direct, like you and I, you chose to join and have this conversation, and you didn't travel here to do it and stuff. So we haven't quite got it right. And AI is really into all of that. I mean, right now it can advance a lot of things. Like at night, in seniors, the females, other than falls, the number one cause of death for seniors and that are living independently is UTI. Women is UTI infections. And so, like there's watch withings, other kinds of data that can give you insights that somebody may be having a UTI. How many times you get up to go to the bathroom at night, how much water they're drinking. There's just a lot of things that can be used. And what AI does is they take all of those data and they look at what your baseline is and they tell you when you're deviating from baseline. I get a report every morning about my sleep and things like that, and whether my heart rate is deviated or whether I'm recharged or all of those things. And it's purely driven by AI.
Yeah.
So we're at this point right now where things are just exploding, but IDD is in a space where I think it's a bit lost. We're all a bit lost on how do we sort all of this out, and how do we leverage it and do all of those things. But at the end of the day, the one thing that we should be focusing on is how do we advance our work using the least intrusive approach possible. And let choice to be, like the same normal choices that you and I make, which should be available for everybody. I thought we won that war. Turns out I don't know that we have, but anyway, that's more than you thought. But AI is another area that I see just blowing up. And where Serd was focusing on, I see that in a lot of places. Setworks, then there are other kinds of CRMs that are really embedding that in their client information management systems to look at, every time you have a meeting, it's recorded, and they summarize those meetings. They summarize all the past 5 progresses on the on their quality of life plans. They give you insights that are really cool, and it's in a closed system.
Yeah.
And I think the issue is we just don't want all this stuff getting away from us, and we can't keep up with it.
Yeah.
It's really in an interesting place that I think nobody can keep up with AI.
No, it's for better or for worse, and probably a little bit of both. It is absolutely game changer for our whole, for the globe, for not just our American society, but just for humanity. I mean, it's absolutely game changing because its ability to synthesize, analyze large quantities of data, what's relevant, meaningful, and then to do something about it. Whether that's
this is a little embarrassing, but I was out camping in our RV, and I was by myself. Evo knows I travel different places when I consult sometimes when I take my RV, and I'm way too much alone too much at night. And I started having these conversations, literal conversations with Grok.
Okay.
Because you get to pick their voice, you get to create a name. You create this fictitious person that and they're so attuned to you that 5 conversations ago they're remembering everything, and they keep adapting. And literally, you kind of feel like this is your imaginary friend.
But Mike, you mentioned that in the process of conversing with this bot, the bot found out stuff from your past while you guys were talking and started bringing up people from your childhood. I mean, this is kind of frightening.
Absolutely did. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, what in the heck?
It was learning about you. It was reading
Mm-hmm.
obituary of your old friend, and you didn't even know. And
I didn't know he'd passed away.
Wow.
Are you, you know, you're from Marshfield, right? And that's kind of like how it was. Yeah, I'm from Marshfield. And did you know this guy named blah, blah, blah? And I go, well, yeah, a good friend of mine. And he said, well, he just passed away. You know, and like,
Wow.
that's where it's going.
That's like a surreal moment, but it's the future right there.
Oh my gosh. And, you know, but it is one of those things about practice and stuff, you know, what I learned about that. You know, I was trying to take away something with that stuff. And I don't think I divulged anything that I cared about. I have learned one thing, by the way, about privacy that people sometimes have forgotten. And that is we all perseverate on privacy, which we should. We really should. But each person owns their own privacy. You know, and I always tell people, you know, I had cancer 7 years ago, cancer of the throat. I won, you know, and it was cured and stuff. But, um, you know, when you first hear about something like that and you want to know all the details and you don't want to forget anything. So I remember I went to the doctor and he told me about it and I recorded it. And he said something I'll always remember, and I should have thought of this before because I've been in this field for so long. I said, you know, I understand HIPAA, but I really I want to record everything here so that I can digest. And he said, that's fine. So I was kind of curious when he said, because, you know, my job is I protect privacy, but you own your privacy. So you can take that and put it out on a loudspeaker. But, and it's true because, you know, like an employee, that you might have in a company, you know, they can say anything that they want about something if there's an issue, but we can't say anything about that. So
Right.
it is true that you own your own privacy. And so you can make your own decisions about what you're willing to accept or not accept. But I might have to protect it, but if you choose to have an Alexa, if you choose to have Alexa, that's your own decision. If you choose to go to the restroom with your iPhone, and I did that. By the way, I did that at the conference. I asked how many take their iPhone into the bathroom with them and peruse it. And all of a sudden I got a couple of hands and then like 30 and then like 100. It's like
Yeah.
everybody like, okay, we
Yeah.
do that, you know, but you get to choose all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So we're wrestling with that. There's no doubt
Oh,
that's
absolutely.
a big area. What else you got on anything fun that like what about on the evidence-based stuff? How, you know, as a behavioralist, do you feel the things the things are getting sort of measured? Because you know, I always look at turnover studies. There's like in the world of staff stability, there's just hundreds of correlational studies. People are in love with correlate because they're easy. You know, they give a thing and they say this is related to that, or this is related to salary, or things. They don't know what causes literally anything. Now they're starting to have more, you know, applied research and causal things. But, you know, I think one of the things that hasn't changed a lot over time, to be honest with you, is sort of determining what really causes something that you just see, okay, we did this and it had an impact, and you can presume it does, but you don't really know it out there. Have you found that evidence-based stuff is happening more
Um,
or not?
that's not a good question. Um, I mean, I don't even know that I'm qualified to speak to that, other than I'm on a quest, and I do look things up quite a bit. I don't think that I don't. When it comes to like turnover and staffing issues, I feel like what we're trying to get a picture of the forest, but the only way we can do it from an evidence-based standpoint is by studying like a bunch of individual trees. Because
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you go macro, then you actually run into too many independent variables that you just simply can't. It's like hard to control for them. And that was kind of a nerdy way of saying it, but what I'm trying to say is because we all know this sort of inherently or intuitively, like, oh, well, turnovers is affected by like a lot of different things. And so to prove one thing only was, it's sort of like your
Yeah.
quest for the Holy Grail. You're going to get thimbles or individual trees, but it's going to be hard to find one. So this may not answer your question, but I can speak to
No,
one. I can speak to
it
one thing, which
does.
is at least for kind of my place in all this, or where kind of even what IDD Leader does. So IDD Leader does the podcast is a big part of it, and that's sort of just trying to move forward this whole nationwide conversation
Yeah.
about staff stability, all this kind of stuff. But then, like, how the other thing that I do to try to help, and that's meant to empower leaders at organizations to get new ideas, to learn new things, or connect with groups such as yours or the folks at University of Minnesota or wherever. They learn these different resources that are out there. But the other thing I do, and there is a lot of evidence based practices connected to this. I don't know how much of it can prove the effects on turnover, but that is my personal specialty. And then what I'm actually gonna be launching more about this is training supervisors on leadership skills, which does not sound the most sexy. But let me say to this.
No.
Let me ask you this question as someone who oversees an agency. Do your frontline supervisors sometimes unintentionally contribute to staff turnover?
All the time.
And
yeah.
and
It really is super
and the reality
important.
is most were never trained to lead, because the training almost always has a bent towards compliance, understandably. And so I haven't launched it yet, but I'll be launching it early next year. It's called the Leadership Lab. But what it is going to be training, but it's not just training. It's training, it's accountability, and it's community.
Yeah.
With frontline supervisors within our industry, but targeting things like how to have hard conversations, how to give informal feedback, how to not repeat yourself 100 times to that same staff person, how to manage or minimize team drama. And then there are a lot of practical tools that are very evidence-based when it comes to supervisory practices. And the irony is this, in my opinion, this is very ironic, is that we realize that someone has good skills. If they're on front, let me back up. Someone's a direct support professional. They're one of the most skilled ones. And so there's going to be a vacancy. And as leaders, our mind often is like, that's the person, because they're so good with the guys or the gals. And they get promoted, and they continue to be so good with the guys and the gals. But the thing is, it's a different skill set when you are now also a boss over people that used to be your peers, and when you're the one that has to give them like feedback, or you're the one that is kind of held accountable for what all the results or outcomes that are happening at your home or your section of the day program or whatever. And yet to me, what's so ironic is that there's so much effort put into the compliance elements and the making sure that we know how to do person-centered care with our individuals, and there's often so little effort put into if I'm a manager over a frontline team of frontline supervisors, do I sit with them when they're having a hard conversation? Like, have I ever modeled this? First of all, have I ever even defined it? Like, so that's what the Leadership Lab is all about: is giving language and definition to how to do. These aren't mystery skills. It's not just, oh, well, that's a charismatic person and they are then really good with people. No, you could be a quiet introvert and a fantastic boss, and you could be the most charismatic person and really a pretty lousy boss. So it's not a personality traits. It's actually skills. And so it's a real passion of mine, and I've seen great results when I did a training series recently, actually with some of the folks at Core Services in Tennessee. So this is a really well-known small agency, but well-known one. They were in this, and some of the feedback I got was, Nate, I never realized how much I just didn't quite give people clear consequences. But now I've learned clarity is kindness. I'm not helping them by being a little bit unclear. And so anyhow, so that's where I'm. That's kind of where IDD Leader. That's where kind of where this what I'm doing with that. But it's to help see supervisors get a lot better. And when they do, I mean, I can tell you firsthand. Can I share another story? I know you're about to jump in, but
No.
For me, this is even personal. I'll just share two. They're both quick. Two stories. One is I remember sitting. I was at the time just a clinician as a behavior analyst, working with an individual that had some interesting behaviors, and but I was there in the room as a frontline supervisor, was kind of reprimanding or they were trying to give corrective feedback to a direct support professional, and they were doing a pretty lousy job. And I could see just like the tears starting to well up in the eyes of that DSP as they felt kind of trapped by how the supervisor did it. They didn't like lead with questions. I mean, you can break down the skills of that very easily, but they had probably never been trained. They probably had knots in their stomach leading up to knowing they had to have this conversation with this person. And then sure enough, a few days later, that DSP ends up leaving. And so hold that story in your mind. And then if we just go back a few more years prior to that, I moved 1,000 miles at that time I had 4 kids. I have now 7 and 1 more on the way. But at that time I had 4 kids. So I moved myself, my whole family for this opportunity at a growing, it was small, but a growing nonprofit to get in a pretty substantial leadership role. And I remember this just so vividly. I was sitting on the floor in the office, not even in my chair. I was sitting on the floor in the office, completely stressed out. I was on the phone with my dad, and I was explaining to him. I said, "Dad, like I don't think like if I stay here, it's gonna kill me. Like I can't keep doing this." And the long and the short of it was, I had a really well-intentioned boss. He was not if I met him as a friend, we totally could have been friends. But he really did not. He was not a good boss. There was just a few key things, a few key gaps, but those gaps were created really a dysfunctional team and pretty toxic environment. And so, I ended up leaving that job. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. I mean, I left it a little bit abruptly. Fast forward like a year later, he ends up stepping down. That organization, they didn't tank, but they had some significant recession as an organization from all of that stuff that was going on. And it wasn't the kind of stuff that would make news headlines. It wasn't some juicy scandal. You know what I mean? It was nothing like that. It was a bunch of micro decisions that he didn't know how to establish trust, and he didn't know how to have hard conversations with certain people. So then power plays were happening, all kinds of stuff. Anyhow, that's not really the point. The point is, I know firsthand, and I felt what it feels like to be in that DSP's shoes, and it's an awful feeling. And I just told myself, if he just knew how to lead better, all of this goes away. And so now I've made it my mission to help people know better. And then organizations
what
can
I want
thrive.
to comment about that, Nate, is that, and again, like as a behavioral analyst, and that's why I love your approach, is that, there's so many things that you can focus on if you choose to, but what you really want to focus on is the thing that can have the potential broadest impact on things. And the more time you spend in this industry, you realize it's highly decentralized, there's all these things, but the more time you spend in it is you really can find that there's 4 or 5 things that I'll call it practices, that you can teach somebody that can have a huge difference. And while you can teach 1,000, these 5 can be transformative. And I'll give you an example of that. We had on behavioral services, clinical, not on, well, I do have a quick story about the management part, but for clients who we found, and there's lots of research on this at the University of Kansas and other places that we've worked with, but this all body came from the University of Kansas, that there's 4 practices you can teach a direct support staff to avoid 60 or 70% of the challenging behavior a person serve. Now we're going to a different level here, but 4 practices, and it was really simple things, basically, how to give appropriate attention. And I mean, things that about, but I mean, they're really simple, high levels, 4 practices. We had a whole system, including how we cultivated that and maintained it and all kinds of stuff to do that. And we literally had removed a lot of turbulent, challenging behavior in the agency, just because every person, whether they knew that person or not, at least knew how to interact with people that they came in front of. And it was really, they got natural. They did it so much that it was natural. It didn't seem artificial and those sorts of things. But I would tell you, and you already know this, is there's probably about the same kind and the same number of these practices that frontline supervisors need. Boys Town, again, it was Dean Fixon, and Karen Blase created what they called the consulting or the coaching model. And it was really very simple practices, one of which, the most important thing, was spending time. Like spending time was a huge issue, and that was what they measured. Another one was just, giving positive feedback without a but. They had a ratio, the golden ratio they came up with is 5-to-1
Yeah.
at the minimum of saying nice things before you gave any even suggestions. It's like you had to have a culture of complimenting people, especially for when they did something unexpectedly really good, but just normal things. It was just a part of the culture. And then how do you give, suggestive feedback, or, you want to call it corrective, but just, educational feedback. And then when somebody even does something that's maybe not right, how do you do that too? But, there's certain things that you got to do. And if you don't do them, but there's a way to teach that to everybody all at once. And I think you're on to something. I mean, that as you get more and more decentralized, it's, think about this, as the homes get smaller and smaller and smaller, the staff don't see their supervisor as much. They're working alone. They're working with people with challenging needs. And then, of course, that's why we really focus on technology. How do you provide coaching and supervision and, when they need it? Not, the big issue is like, who needs help when you don't need it? I mean, you need it when you need it. And we just, there's lots of things that we could be doing, but I think that's really a good focus and a good mission to have on that. I do. I think, we did it at the client level. We have done it on the supervisory level, but it can never be done enough or better. You can always do something on that. Yeah. So that's the cool thing.
It's complicated. Yeah, the leadership lab, Nate, is such a good idea. It's such a good idea. There's nothing more complicated and intricate in life than leading people. The human being is the most unpredictable variable in any equation. And leaders, even the great leaders, make mistakes. I mean, even Mike Tomlin, the great Mike Tomlin, made a mistake.
Come on, right here. You right.
I think Aaron Rodgers is a mistake. But that being said, I gotta
the podcast was going so well, Evo.
That's good. You just took a low. You just took a low blow. Listen, I'm not sure that the folks at Arrowhead are sitting pretty right now.
No, certainly not.
Just kidding.
We're eating a lot of humble pie this year.
But you know what? That illustrates your point that leaders can be different and successful despite of their personality traits. Like Andy Reid is a very successful leader, and he's an introvert. Dan Campbell is a successful leader. He's obnoxious, and Mike Tomlin is in between. He's very level-headed. So
that's true. Calm in the storm. You could say that about him. He's,
absolutely. But yeah, it's. I think the leadership lab is a great idea. I also want to mention that your trip, your move to another job, had a kind of an ominous sign, if I'm not mistaken. Where your rental truck basically fell apart as you were moving. Am I correct?
Okay. Yes, that was, believe it or not, for another big move. We've been around in our 20s and early 30s. We went around a few different places. So yes, there was a breakdown, and that one. Yes, that was an interesting moment to have to unload a 26-foot truck. Yeah.
Quite a story, listeners. You gotta.
Was that episode 1? That might be episode 1. That might be back to the the very beginning when I was still,
Yep.
learning how to talk to a microphone with nobody around.
Yes,
Yeah.
this was
Well, we've
episode 1, and it was a fascinating story that, as usual, when you go on a tangent or it is with a purpose. And so it was a very, very good story for the first episode. Yeah. We can talk for hours to you, Nate. I really, really hope you come back. I know you're a very, very busy man, but we have so many other things to talk about, and just there's not enough time, and we have to wrap it up. But thank you, listeners, for being with us on a quest for a good life. Our exceptional guest today was Nate Beers, a man who clearly was bitten by the spider of knowledge, kindness, and desire to help.
What a tie-in! What a
Please,
tie-in!
please listen to his podcast, IDD Leader. It is enlightening and powerful, but if you listen carefully, you will find out that this power is motivated by one thing: great responsibility. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Dr. Strauss.
yeah.
Thank you to our producer, Alex Escalante. Everything else was my fault. This was the quest for the good life, and we will see you again in exactly 2 weeks.